Guys, maybe just tell us a bit about yourselves, and I think that will just give the audience a sense of what you'll bring to the table in this discussion on the metaverse. And also, if they want to connect with you later, they'll also know your areas of speciality. So, Joe, maybe we'll start with you. Then we'll go to Mick and Brent. Definitely not least coming last to you there, Brent. So let's start with yourself, Joe.
Hi, thanks so much, Ibrahim. Yeah, great to be here today. So my name's Joe. I'm a marketer, communicator, researcher. I'm currently a consultant to Quixel at Epic Games, as Jordan mentioned just now. So there I lead the marketing communications for the Quixel business unit. So we focus on 3D scanning and content. But I'm also here today in my personal capacity as an independent consultant and a PhD candidate, where my research focus is on creative collaboration in the metaverse.
Cool. Mick, over to you.
Cool. So Mick Adler, and I'm the CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer at FuseBox Online. I used to run a company called Humber, which I sold 4 months ago to FuseBox, so hence setting up the new division over there. And I'm here today in my personal capacity as an XR strategist, basically just advising companies around the world in terms of VR and AR technology and how they can implement it and how they can adopt it in order to basically what companies really want to do in terms of increase revenue or save on costs. And that's my story.
Cool. Brent, over to you.
Thanks, Ibrahim, and thanks for the BOG guys for having us on and having me on as well. My name's Brent Alexander. I'm a creative technologist, digital consultant, and a 3D artist as well. Worked for many years in real-time rendering and real-time visualization, specifically with virtual reality, and also working quite closely with Epic Games and Unreal Engine, and a very strong marketing history as well. I've been a digital marketing consultant for most of my career, and of late also involved in consulting for companies on the metaverse, and was very privileged to be involved in a startup in the last 2 years in creating a metaverse here in South Africa. And what Joe will correct me is it's a meta world. It's not the metaverse. It's part of the metaverse. But I'm very happy to be here. Thanks, guys.
Cool. Thank you, Brett. That's a great introduction. So, each of our speakers definitely have real-world experience in the metaverse or exploring ideas that are important to collaboration and actually undertaking projects in the metaverse. I think let's start the discussion right at the beginning. And Mick, maybe we'll throw this one out to you. What is the metaverse? What are we talking about, Joe?
I love that question. Okay. So I think the metaverse, there's 2 groups of people. There's those involved in the XR industry. So you'll see this word getting thrown around just left, right, and center. And then I think for those who aren't in the XR industry, it's a little bit of a sort of a mystic kind of word. So I guess there's a long and there's a short answer. The long answer is that the metaverse is basically an embodied internet, where just imagine how you interact with the internet today. It would be like that, except as opposed to browsing and sort of viewing on through a screen, you'll be doing it in physicality. And when I mean in physicality, it's actually virtual physicality in the sense of you'll be accessing it through a VR headset or through an AR or MR headset. So that's the long explanation, and I think the more difficult one. The shorter explanation is go watch the movie Ready Player One, and that's your answer.
Cool. So, Mick, that's almost like reading a set book at school. You can explain it, or you can say just go and watch the movie, and
so much easier.
that'll explain what. So I think you're giving away some of your strategies there at school. So excellent. So that's good and quick advice. Just go watch the movie. And Joe, maybe from your side, you're working, I know, with Epic, and your PhDs on collaboration in the metaverse, and we've seen this feature where companies can build their own islands, for instance, in Fortnite. So maybe just tell us a bit about your work. What does collaboration in the metaverse mean? Maybe a bit about how companies can start getting involved as well. Maybe some idea on what Fortnite's been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So just coming back to what Mick was saying about the metaverse there, I love how he split it into the two. I was actually reading recently how Microsoft was defining it, and Microsoft were very much defining it as kind of discrete experiences or platforms that each were metaverses, rather than this overarching interconnected concept that I think I certainly use, and I know Mick does. And from what Brent has been saying as well, I think he does as well. So yeah, depending on who you'll ask, you'll get lots of different definitions. There's one thing that I really like that came out recently, which was as Tony Parisi from Unity. He came out with the rules of the metaverse, and I'll go through those because I think it's quite a salient point for us to jump off from. So let me just pull up my notes because I don't know them off by heart yet, but perhaps one day I will. So the rule number one is that there is only one metaverse. So you can think of it like a universe. Rule 2 is that the metaverse is for everyone. Rule 3 is that nobody controls the metaverse. Rule 4 is that the metaverse is open. Rule 5 is the metaverse is hardware independent. Rule 6 is the metaverse is a network. And rule 7 is the metaverse is the internet. And I certainly think of it as like a 3D evolved, immersive and more experiential version of the internet. So that's my take on it. And yeah, and as Brent said, that anything that people are creating are individual worlds. So virtual worlds, meta worlds, whatever, but it all flows into the wider metaverse. So that's kind of my view on it. And yeah, in terms of Fortnite, I mean, it's certainly been said that Fortnite is building a foundation for part of the metaverse, if you like. There's the creative mode has been available for a long time now, so brands are able to go and create their own maps. There's been some awesome case studies with Lavazza doing it. Even the Biden-Harris campaign had their own custom map on Fortnite, which is really interesting. And not just Fortnite as well. I know Gucci's done, they had millions, I think 10 million people visit their experience in Roblox, for example. So yeah, I think that that smart companies at the moment are really setting up the space that will democratize creation in the metaverse. So it's not just, as we saw in the rules there, it's not anyone controlling it or creating the metaverse. It's providing the basis for creators in and of themselves, individuals, small companies, big companies, to all create their own experiences and their own worlds within this new space.
Cool. Thank you, Joe. I think you've given us some good steer to hand over to Brent. So Brent, you've got a very, very strong background in marketing and also in developing, applications, gaming applications in education, etc. And one of the principles of the metaverse that Joe mentioned is no one controls the metaverse. But, when you look at a marketer, their job is to take companies into the metaverse, build the brands there. So, maybe just give us some steer on how companies can get involved, maybe what it could cost to build something in the metaverse, and then maybe more philosophically, will the metaverse still be democratic, and can we still say no one controls it, as more and more of the very large companies actually start investing a lot more effort and time in the metaverse?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Abraham, and thank you. And I think as we sort of move into this era of technology and what Mark Zuckerberg calls the sort of the future of personal computing, is being able to connect people in these virtual worlds per se. And this is going to pose a lot of challenges as well as incredible opportunities for companies to get involved. And it's really going to push the level of innovation that a company needs to look at in terms of promoting their products or services within these virtual worlds. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword on how one would go about this. The interesting part is, and I think we spoke the last time we all got together, was on how new jobs are going to be created. Metaverse consultants, these types of things. There are jobs that we haven't even thought of yet that are going to sort of come out of this. The same as the onset of social media with Facebook, etc. Is we now have social media strategists, people that manage social media. Those kind of jobs 10 to 12 years ago didn't really exist. So there's a lot of interesting sides to what the metaverse can create. But to answer your question, how companies get involved, it's all about really the scope of what the metaverse is going to achieve in the next 5, 10, 20 years. Right now, I believe it's very brand focused. Brands are getting involved in all sorts, as Joe mentioned, even the Biden-Harris campaign. anything that is sort of a brand and can try and get access to the types of users that are in these virtual worlds at the moment, will want to take advantage of that. But a very important point to mention is that these virtual worlds need to reach some sort of critical mass, and I think we're going to touch on this a couple of times during the session. Is to at the moment it's people that are quite niche in terms of how they're involved. Also the limitation of hardware in getting into some of these metaverses. But I think what Facebook and Meta Horizons is doing at the moment is definitely going to broaden it to a much bigger market. And to put that in a sort of a nutshell sort of sense, is that if you look at Facebook the way it is now, we've got groups, we've got personal profiles, those types of things. Call it your avatar, whatever that you log in with. Now picture this in a little bit more of an immersive and almost a 3D environment, where you can go and browse some of these shops, have your little clubhouse where you can go and meet other people as certain 3D visualization or 3D, 3D image of yourself, which we'd call an avatar. So, but like I said, it's going to take some time to reach that critical mass. But I think brands that want to get involved right now I'll touch on some of the key aspects, and I think Joe can touch a lot of those. And one of those big things is collaboration, being able to collaborate within the metaverse, whether this is from a business sense, educational sense, training, or just physically, or not physically connecting, being able to connect across the world in a space, in a 3D virtual environment. And I think we all know what has really accelerated this in the last 2 years, and that is obviously the pandemic has really put this at the front of people's minds on looking at how we connect on a day-to-day basis. I haven't got you on about the democratization of it, but I think that's the whole thing about the metaverse is it needs to be decentralized. And when we're basing it on things like NFTs and blockchain technology, I think that sort of becomes the crux of what it's all about. And certainly we don't want to have one big corporation in charge of it, like a Facebook, like Meta. It needs to incorporate and be accessible to everybody and not be controlled. But it's a difficult one to answer at this stage. Ibrahim, I think we need to see how it evolves.
There's an interesting point that you mentioned there, Brent, around hardware and the fact that we are talking here about Africa, and it's going to be a very long time before we see mass market of VR headsets here. We're talking about a continent that has only about 50% of people have regular internet access. So, I think that's a really key question when we talk about Africa. VR is not going to be the first experience for most people. AR, however, may well be. And I know Mick's very passionate about that. And I think there's some really interesting things that came out on the Niantic Lightship launch last night.
Yeah, 100%. Speaking to Joe's point, I think, Joe, like I said to you before, the way that you look at this in terms of most companies are looking sort of with a 10-year horizon. Most people, you're looking with like a 30 to 35-year horizon. So I think it's amazing. And to that point, I definitely agree with you. I think VR is not exactly the most accessible thing. It's difficult, especially because, look, where we are with VR right now, yes, companies like Meta, Oculus are making it sort of more accessible, but this isn't true VR. True VR is Omni treadmill, it's haptic feedback, it's, all these kind of stuff, which, like Joe said, in sort of the rural parts of Africa, when sort of your basic necessities aren't exactly readily available, it's difficult to get something like an Omni treadmill for some reason. But hopefully, I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the technology unfolds and just how immersive it can truly be. And that's when we start to chat sort of neural interfaces as opposed to, or sort of in place of the treadmills and the haptic suits, which is also very much dystopian future, Ready Player 2 kind of vibe. But I think this is too far of a conversation. It's too far in the future. So let's bring it back a bit and maybe bring it back to Ibrahim.
Yeah, I agree with Nick. It
Cool.
does
So
go deep, and it does bring up a lot of questions about this dystopian future of ours.
Absolutely. But I think that's why you'll hear, right? It doesn't have to be dystopian. It can be positive. It can contribute to economic growth. And I think, it's been used to show in fiction a dystopian world, which tends to go well with like sci-fi. But in the real world, what we can find is there's actually a lot of good that can be unlocked with the tech. And, Brent, you mentioned NFTs and crypto, and maybe I'll throw that back to Mick to say, we're saying that physical hardware could be a barrier to adoption, especially in developing continents. Let's look at Africa. But we're also saying, on the other hand, there's no one metaverse. There are meta worlds that will probably be a company's first foray into the metaverse, which is to create their own meta world. So, looking at things like NFTs, which you don't need to be in a meta world in order to use, but it could be related to something in there, and it's a lot easier for people to access from a smartphone. If I have to ask, Mick, and actually it's an open question to everyone else to take it, which would be the most readily available entry point to consumers on the African continent of any part of a meta world or metaverse? Where would someone logically start? What's the most accessible piece?
I think Joe's mouthing the first bit there.
Yeah. Joe, go first.
Yeah, no, mobile. Obviously, not everybody, but most Africans now have a supercomputer in their pocket. And augmented reality, so that's that overlay of reality through your phone's camera, is something that is becoming more and more accessible for anybody within Africa. And brands can really seek to create experiences that speak to the audience. So meeting the audience where they're at, really knowing, just being a good marketer, knowing what your audience is all about, knowing what your customers' wants are, needs are, pain points are, and being able to put in really fun, experiential, augmented reality experiences into their marketing campaigns that's not the future, that's the present. And I think there's real opportunities to look at there for various different industries.
100%. And then, sorry, Ibrahim, I think just coming from the other side, so while Joe is sort of looking at that mobile entry point, there's also the gaming side as well, which I guess could be sort of under the same umbrella as mobile. But I mean, right now when it comes to Fortnite and Roblox and all these kind of gaming platforms, yes, it's not really an African kind of play. It's more of a sort of a first world global kind of play. But I think we're seeing some very interesting stuff there. I think a lot of it's already started. I mean, Justin Bieber right now is hosting a virtual concert, which is quite interesting because it's like the first independent one outside of one of the gaming engines. And I think that could be interesting because, to leverage purely off his IP and his name to drive this, as opposed to Fortnite or Travis Scott and Ariana Grande, who leveraged off Fortnite's IP. It'll be interesting to see what Justin Bieber can do. So gaming is essentially that other entry point to the metaverse, which is obviously resonates quite well with Gen Z.
And NFTs and crypto, Mick, do you think, that's got widespread adoption in Africa? A lot of people, young people especially, are trading crypto or have a desire to do so. They all know what NFTs are. Many people come and speak to you about NFTs. Yes, they're asking what are they, but they've heard of them. It excites them in some way. So, gaming's one. We've seen mobile games have had reasonably high adoption in Africa. It's growing. We've seen the mobile gaming space is strong, but we've also seen the crypto space is strong. Could crypto also effectively be a pathway into the metaverse?
Yes, but we just have to separate that from crypto trading, because crypto trading is basically just like an evolution of like Forex trading. So we just have to kind of just, put that to the side. But 100%, I think when it comes to all these different altcoins and that have amazing use cases, and sure, they might not be as widely traded as some of the more stable coins, but their use cases are they're amazing, some of them. And I think with the rise of NFTs as well, once again, right now it's a bit of a hype. But I think as soon as it calms down, I think as people start to find sort of more relevant use cases and applications, I think it's going to start to ramp up and take a bit more of a stable trajectory in order to mass adoption. But I think the truth of the matter is that with NFTs is that yes, we can start building up a bit of an audience and a bit of a sort of hype around NFTs right now before we start getting into this immersive world. But at the end of the day, when we truly reach mass adoption of immersive tech, that's when these NFTs truly come to life. Because I think a good example would be, if Ibrahim, if I come to you and I tell you that I own a CryptoPunk, which is basically that like sort of minimal pixelated kind of art pieces, it doesn't really mean much to you. But if both of us have got a augmented reality wearable that's got somewhat of a shared experience, if you come over to my house and I've got this floating CryptoPunk sort of, floating in my living room for you to look at, and not for me to be like, hey, check out my CryptoPunk. I think once we hit that sort of shared experience, that's when we can truly unlock the power of NFTs, because then it becomes more valuable in that sense. I mean, right now we've seen some great use cases with NFTs in gaming, in the gaming sphere. But I think to really hit mass adoption, it needs to be as if you own something right now. Like if you want to show me an art piece, if you just bought something, you know what I mean? You can physically come show me what you just bought or what you got. And I think that would be the evolution up, but it can't happen until we reach mass adoption within the sort of mixed reality immersive realm.
So guys, there's a question in the chat, and I'm addressing it now because it fits in with the whole NFT discussion, and that's around ownership of IP and licensing. And to an extent, NFTs are a decentralized way of addressing ownership in a decentralized world. So I think if we can maybe throw that question out, I don't know who wants to tackle that, but given what we know so far about meta worlds, how would we deal with issues of IP licensing and ownership? How would that be enforced? Should it be enforced?
I've got a slightly different angle I'm coming at for that question, and that's around interoperability, right? So in order for there to be a true metaverse, there has to be interoperability between the various different worlds. There has to be a seamlessness about it, and that comes into the IP and licensing, and also ties back into the decentralization discussion. And it's going to be a really interesting one to watch, because Web 2 has been all about, there's like we've been saying, there's positives and negatives. There was huge opportunity with Web 2 because there were new jobs created. It gave a voice to the voiceless, but it also laid the foundations for quite dangerous monopolism. It laid foundations for misinformation campaigns that have destabilized democracy. So there's always like pros and cons, and it's the same with Web 3. And I think when it comes to Web 3 and metaverse and these discussions, there are now very good, important discussions going on with regards to standards and interoperability, and that's going to be really important to watch as we continue to see this going forward.
So then the interesting question, maybe Brent or yourself or Mick will take it, is if the standards aren't as yet finalized, right? That's what I'm hearing, is this talk on standards. It's not finalized yet, but you've got companies that are moving early to start building early worlds. Is there a danger that they may start building something which maybe at some point doesn't align to standards that are agreed upon later? Is that a danger for early adopters and first movers in the space?
If I could take that one, I think it needs to evolve, and I think Joe sort of mentioned that we need to see how this is going to develop and how IP is sort of interpreted or licensed within the metaverse. Simple example: if I want an avatar, I want to be the Hulk from the Avengers. Is that an IP infringement? Is that license infringement? And I think we're kind of splitting hairs there in terms of what should be made available to people. But on the flip side of the coin is there's an opportunity for the likes of Marvel, etc. And I think before we look at the issues, I think we're going to have to first get the opportunities in there and understand what IP and how IP and licensing stuff is going to live in the metaverse. And I think all it's presenting now for brands is another way, the same as someone has a Funko now of the Hulk. You're going to have an avatar that you could choose in the metaverse as well. So it's basically just an additional extension of what companies can license and what sort of IP they can own within the metaverse as well. But if we're talking about what issues to overcome, I think it's going to be very similar to the issues we would need to overcome, that we are trying to overcome all the time with licensing and IP infringement. I think it's kind of par for the course, unfortunately. But there's going to be a lot of exciting times on what can be licensed and what sort of IP ownership can be put through. And if we're looking at entire sort of meta worlds based around one brand, using Marvel, for example, a place that you could visit and be your favorite Marvel character and visit some of the amazing places in the Marvel universe, that's a huge opportunity. And yeah, I think to overcome it is, yeah, it's the basic sticks and stones of law, of legal, legal systems, legal structures that will look after that stuff, I think.
Cool. So, I mean, you could look then at a meta world as each company's or each brand's opportunity to have their own theme park, effectively. We've seen in the physical world, it's only certain types of businesses that naturally align themselves to that type of experience. But, obviously, given that the meta world transcends physical limitations, it seems that you can now actually, each brand can create their own theme park effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think
About websites, for example, when you go to a certain website, you may not know that it's been built on WordPress unless you really dig into it. Just by looking at it, it looks like that person's brand. It feels like that person's brand. It's got all of their content on it. But it was enabled. It was only made possible through WordPress, and it will be the same, I believe, with the metaverse that we're building. There'll be whole worlds and spaces and experiences that feel like that person's brand, that company's brand, or that organization. But it's been enabled. It's been empowered by companies underneath that.
Yeah, I think, Joe, you touched on a great point. At some point, there's going to be jobs and studios that are creating these experiences. As you are a web designer or someone who creates websites, or someone who's going to be creating these experiences or worlds for your customers and clients. And obviously, we're going to be creating tools as well that people can use, and tools that are available to the metaverse that can be sort of re-implemented in other places. And there's a whole nother IP and ownership question and licensing question on some of the software, or the sort of XR interfaces that are going to be created, and the XR tools that can be created that are going to make lives easier, like a PayPal, for example. Maybe not the best example, but something of that sort of nature that is going to make your life easier within the metaverse. Ways to pay for things, ways to interact with people, those types of things.
100%. I think just going back to Joe's point, I think the way she sort of explained it in terms of how each company's meta world is like their website, I think it's a very good example, because I think like you'll have brands like Lego and Marvel who will create somewhat of a theme park for their experience when you go into their world. But then you'll have sort of on the B2B side, you're not going to have a company like Ibrahim. Is this like a local audience, right? Business of gaming, or is this?
Look, it's primarily local, but I think it's virtual, so
Okay.
you could have anyone listening. So I think if you want to give a local perspective, it's fine. You want to give an international perspective, or whatever you're comfortable chatting about.
Okay, so then like a builder's warehouse, in the case of like a local example, I mean, to go into like a builder's warehouse world is not going to be the most fun thing. Actually, maybe, because it's like building and stuff. But I guess what I'm saying is in the B2B side, and sort of the it's going to be a bit more of like a showroom type style, as opposed to like theme parks. But once again, it's just like an immersive version of their website with their core intention in mind. If it's sort of immersion and brand engagement and awareness and brand positivity, then 100% you'll have a theme park for like Lego. If it's more just sort of selling these high-end consumer or business to business products, then it's going to be a showroom. So obviously, whatever their website objective is, it's almost like just converting that into their meta world essentially, and just making it more immersive.
Cool. So I think what came up for me in this conversation is, and it ties back to what was said earlier, which is perhaps with the hardware restrictions, internet restrictions, maybe the absolute immersion in a meta world or metaverse is perhaps still a bit of a way away for, let's say, a continent like Africa or other developing continents. But there's also a whole supply chain and economy built around servicing the metaverse. So what's becoming interesting to me is, could we potentially have a case where this takes off quite well, let's say in the developed world, but you've got a lot of very talented and creative people in the developing world that can then actually build the bits and pieces and provide the services needed to actually build it up. So you'd actually have some sort of a trade route, as it were, of maybe creative services coming out of developing economies to actually service the actual metaverse that's taken off in developed economies.
I 100% think that is, in fact, it is already the case in many respects. And companies are waking up to the fact that there's incredible talent across Africa finally. And it was always silver linings. I think one of the silver linings with the pandemic is that various organizations are far more open to things like remote working. and to realizing that their potential talent pool is global. And that's certainly the case when when it comes to building virtual worlds. They're virtual. You don't need to be anywhere except perhaps somewhere with decent internet, which may be a challenge, but only, I think, a very short-term challenge. Generally speaking, for Africa now, I think that we're certainly going in the right direction there. But another thing that was touched upon there was, I think Africa has always been a leapfrog. So whereas we had everybody else was using laptops and desktop computers, Africa kind of went straight to mobile for various different reasons. And it's not per se a leapfrog that we're seeing with this, but I think there's something, there's a perhaps slightly different route that Africa's going here. So with VR, we have, it's been gaining, and Meta is now creating a space where it's much more accessible for the consumer market. I believe in Africa, it's actually going to be enterprise and business that's going to lead the way here. And the reason being is that they're the ones that have the money. So rather than just providing a laptop to all of your employees, it's very accessible now to supply a VR headset as well, so that your distributed teams can connect, can collaborate more easily, whether they're in Africa or whether they're elsewhere. And that's something that I find really exciting.
So then I think picking up on that, Joe, you could then have an early community of corporate users or people that work for corporates and have been given the device by corporate. So you'll have maybe a limited community, perhaps of a few 100,000 or maybe 1 million people across the continent, on its own. And they will then be interacting perhaps as a forerunner, as a pioneer community, if you want to use the physical terms. And I think, Mick, this is one maybe coming back to you. So would this community perhaps look to create their own stable coins or their own tokens or their own even crypto coin to transact amongst themselves in this early world? How do you see that piece coming about?
It's a good question. I think it depends on sort of how things shape up over the next couple of years. I think we could have select altcoins that sort of play the role of the currency within a particular group, and then you either get like white labeled or whatever the case, or perhaps a company with sort of a big enough agenda would perhaps create their own coins. It just depends on what the use case for those coins are, whether it be somewhat of like a loyalty, somewhat of a rewards and gamification component. It just depends on what they want to use them for. But I think if there's a will, there's a way. If they need to, and if they see the benefit of it, they definitely will. It's becoming a lot more accessible and a lot easier to create these altcoins. I mean, they're pretty much sprouting out all over the show. But it'll be interesting. It's a bit difficult to answer right now, but maybe stay tuned in a couple of years. We can see.
Cool. And then Brent, back to you. When we had the pre-discussion a few nights ago, and we were talking about the possibilities of marketing in the metaverse, and we said, what if a company represented itself via an avatar or character, or an avatar or two, and the company actually befriended you in the metaverse, and we asked the question, and maybe we want to tackle it here for the audience, is could a brand become your friend in the metaverse? And if it did, ethically, what are the considerations? Are you taking advice from your friend? Are you taking advice from a brand? Should a brand tell you that they're behind an avatar when they befriend you? I think it's just it's a bit of fun and games here, but it's also a very interesting point. It's not inconceivable at all. So I'd love to get your views, and perhaps Joe and Mick as well.
Definitely not inconceivable. Mick was talking about Justin Bieber. Trust me, Justin Bieber is going to be in the metaverse somewhere, and you will get maybe to meet him. And you hopefully won't have a whole bunch of bodyguards around him either. You should be just there to chat to. But it's an interesting one that you pose. I don't think Nike would walk up to you and befriend you per se. But what we spoke about when we met before is we're going to have areas where people, like-minded individuals. I'm a huge Nike MX90 fan. I'd like to collect Nike MX90s, and I would like a place where I can go to and show off my sort of NFT versioned Nike MX90s that I've got on my avatar. So, and I think let's use a football team, for example, as well. There's going to be places where brands and like-minded people that are very interested in certain brands will be able to go and be able to interact with each other and find a space that is something that is very, very, which is which is close to them. And I think that's what we're going to see. But yeah, in terms of I like the idea of, yes, someone befriending in the metaverse, and who's their brand. Our people are brands as well. And we mentioned Justin Bieber, and things are going to be like that. There's going to be these virtual representations of people as well. And that brings in, again, IP ownership and licensing. Is this really is this really Donald Trump? Is this really Justin Bieber? You know, there's all those types of things to worry about. So it's interesting times. But yeah, brands are going to have a lot of fun with implementing themselves and innovating to get into this space.
Yeah, I think the personal brand, that's going to be interesting. I think, like you said, I mean, there's really not much value in sort of befriending like a narc embodied in an avatar. But, you know, on sort of the AR side of the metaverse, when we sort of reach that true sort of ability to clone one's personality in one's person, I mean, can you imagine how much would you pay per month to sort of have your own personal version of like an Elon Musk or a Steve Jobs or someone like that, who you can converse with, you can get their advice on, you can, you know, just chat with? I mean, that would be exceptional. And I think the monetization around that as well. I mean, if you've got a strong brand, especially, I think Elon Musk, once again, probably comes to mind. It would be crazy to see the monetization models around that.
Yeah, good branding is good branding. I mean, I have brands that I love and I love interacting with, and it's just the same. It's the same in the metaverse, I think. And it comes down to people. It's knowing people really well, and we're all still humans, even if we may be meta-humans in the future.
So I think, guys, maybe just to close out, maybe the last question or two is, if we're seeing that, you know, these famous people could definitely become valuable in terms of avatars and talking to them, etc., there's also, like you said, a massive possibility for impersonation in the metaverse. So, you know, someone saying they're Joe or someone saying they're Brent, or 10 people in 10 different worlds, all being Brent, doing different things. You know, so could it be that we would have some sort of mass licensing of an individual's identity in the metaverse? So like, you know, everyone runs to secure their URL, you know, so brandadler.com, you want to secure it before someone buys it and sits on it. So could it be like that in the metaverse, you know, maybe via something like an NFT? You know, could people actually then be told, look, go and produce your ID book, register NFTs on your identity, and take it from there? So, you know, just some thoughts on that. You know, identity in the metaverse, will each person become an IP holder effectively?
Deep fakes are terrifying already. It's quite scary how good they are. But you know, I think similar to what we have here with certification, you know, blue tick, that kind of thing, that could be something that would come in to protect people's brands and identities. You know, although this is decentralized, there could be organizations such as that we have the Internet Society and ICANN that help manage the overall wellness of the World Wide Web and the openness of the World Wide Web. I can imagine things like that existing as well.
Yeah,
Cool.
I think, like Joe said, it's that blue tick, it's that verification through blockchain. It's, in fact, I think we'd actually argue that as blockchain just becomes more widely adopted, I think the sort of these deep fakes and these impersonations will actually start, I'm not going to say fall away, because I think, you know, these crooks and these impersonators will always have plan B, but I think it's going to become a lot more easier to spot than it is right now.
Cool. And Mick, it's interesting. So, you know, my question was going to be, you know, are we moving towards some sort of centralization inside the decentralized system if we need blue ticks and things? Because someone's got to do it, right? But again, it's old world thinking on my part that there'll be some agency that's going to tick you. You're saying this could be done via the blockchain. So, you know, I don't expect you to have an answer because it hasn't necessarily been built yet, but how would you think something like that could work?
Okay, so immersive tech is more my expertise. I think blockchain and AI, I need like I know a little bit about, but I could get back to you on that if you want.
Cool. Maybe research for the listeners. See if they can come up with a blockchain verification system for a metaverse.